everyone, thank you for joining me. A brand new sci-fi film called Mickey 17 has just been released less than 2 weeks ago. This film was directed by Oscar-winning director Bong Joon-ho, who also created Parasite and Snowpiercer, and the leading role is taken by Robert Pattinson, who very recently proved his acting prowess through films such as The Lighthouse and The Batman. This film is based on a 2022 novel, Mickey 7, written by Edward Ashton. Having read the book and seen the film in cinema, I would like to compare these two in today's video. Now, I would not focus on finding out which one is better or superior to the other one because they are completely different media. Instead, I would prefer to focus on the similarities and differences between these two. I will let you know which aspects of the film are completely loyal to the source material and which elements were rather invented by the creative team. I will start with some general comparisons of premise and characters that don't really contain any major spoilers, and then I will go into a little bit more detail regarding the plot of the film and how it's similar or different from the book, for which I will put timestamps for you in case you haven't seen the film, so you can skip that part of the discussion. I will probably go into the plot of the film more than the book itself because I am guessing that more of you watching probably have seen the film and you're wondering whether you should read the book. Now, one thing you should note is that Mickey 7 is followed by Antimatter Blues, so this is really a duology, whereas the film only covers the first book. And for that reason, I will avoid giving away too much about the book in case you want to enjoy the duology in full. Let's start with the most general comparison between the book and the film, which is the narrative structure. The opening scene of the film follows the book very closely, in which Mickey Barnes wakes up in a frozen crevice and he did not think that he could be rescued. Mickey is known as an expendable, meaning that his sole purpose on the ship is to take on tasks with high likelihood and high risk of death. And in the case of his death, another copy of him will simply be printed out and replace him. In the book, we're seeing the 7th iteration of Mickey Barnes, whereas in the film, it's Mickey 17. From there on, the film pretty much gives you all of the backstory all in one go regarding the ship that Mickey is on and why he signed on to be an expendable. Whereas in the book, pretty much every other chapter alternates to a backstory. For example, chapter 1 is Mickey finding himself in the frozen crevice, encountering some creatures, and the consequences that ensue. And then chapter 2 jumps into the backstory of the expedition, and then chapter 3 returns to the present and the sequence of actions that chapter 1 has initiated. And the book alternates pretty much throughout the entire narrative like that. The advantage of this narrative technique is that the book built a very complex, very expansive world of spacefaring expeditions, the histories of various worlds and planets that have been colonized, and different ships that have set out into space and their varying fate. However, the more this takes place and the closer it gets to the narrative climax, it starts to become a little bit tiring because during the reading process, I felt like I was constantly put on hold while I was trying to watch a scene unfold in front of my eyes, and then I'm pulled away from this linear timeline and jumped into a backstory. Now, I should mention that book 2 does a lot less of this alternating between present and past, and it rather follows the cast of characters and their action in a chronological linear timeline. I think only 2 out of the 24 chapters in book 2 are really flashbacks, but that does make sense because book 1 is what really established the universe and builds the world that this story takes place in, so there is a lot more history to talk about. Whereas book 2 is just a very tightly paced quest that you follow from beginning to end. Next, let's compare the world building between the film and the book. In both the source material and the film, the story takes place on Niflheim, which is a frozen planet. I think the film did a very good job recreating that frozen landscape with all of the snowy ice coverings, making it very clear that the world is cold and unforgiving. Although a major deviation from the book is that the human crew members in the film seem to just be able to leave the spaceship, set foot on the surface of the planet, and breathe and talk, whereas the book makes it quite clear that the air on Niflheim is not exactly breathable, one of the major reasons being that the oxygen content of the air is below 10%, making it impossible to start fires. Therefore, the expedition ship Drakkar can't simply just unload all of its crew members onto the surface of the planet and survive there. That detail, the fact that they can't simply just start fires and warm themselves, makes the planet a little bit more harsh and difficult to survive on. And because of this, human beings in the book have to wear rebreathers whenever they go outside of the spaceship. Now, I could see why they changed that in the film, because if all the dialogues in the film are delivered through a breathing device, it would sound awful in the cinema and it wouldn't be a very enjoyable experience. So I would not fault the director for that choice. Another major change, I think, is that the film simplified this space expedition as just a ship leaving Earth going to Niflheim to seek to build a colony, whereas in the book there's quite a network of complex spacefaring expeditions that have already taken place. There are multiple worlds that have been colonized. There are places called Eden, New Hope, Longshot. There are various space stations involved to serve as way stations for people to go from colonized world further on into the space beyond and find even more planets. But I do see how that will be probably too much of an info dump within the space of a 2-hour film, whereas if you sit at home with a book for 10 to 15 hours, you can fully immerse in that world of space expeditions. But within the ship, in terms of how calories are rationed, how biological materials are recycled and broken down into its molecular parts, some of them going towards making disgusting food paste, and some of it going towards printing another copy of Mickey, all of that, I would say, stayed true to the source material. Although I do have something of a qualm with this premise in that you can take protein and calcium and all that biological material and print out a very sophisticated human being, but apparently there is no way to print out some food for the crew members. Like, we can print a human being, but not a tomato or some chicken nuggets. And the calorie rationing is a constant theme in Mickey 7. I was almost relieved that the film didn't focus so much on the calorie rationing and the constant hunger, because I really found it hard to accept the idea that you can take biological material and print something as sophisticated as a human being, but not just some more food for the crew members. So I was wrestling with this idea throughout book 1, and then in book 2, Antimatter Blues, the author actually specifically commented on the fact that the printer that produces Mickey can be programmed to create any organic matter, which led me to think that maybe this is an intentional satire, in that there are many things in this world and many resources that can be used to directly make people's lives better, but they are just wasted instead. I'm sure there are many iterations of this in the corporate world where employees can just be directly given more benefit. However, a lot of money is spent on things that are very unwieldy and very expensive and very energy costing. I think another major world-building difference between the film and the book is in the creepers. So the creepers are a native species on the planet Niflheim. They have many segments on their body, many legs, and they have mandibles on their head. In the book, they created this very complicated tunnel system beneath the surface of Niflheim. That is where they nest and travel. I think the idea is that they resemble worms, which is why they are capable of burrowing into the ground and creating these tunnels. Now, indeed, in Antimatter Blues, one of the characters referred to the creepers as wormy. And in terms of visualizing that, I do think the film did a good job. Although I do think the appearance of the creeper in the book is supposed to be a little bit more scary and intimidating, and some of the interactions between humans and creepers in the book are in fact violent. And I do think that the relationship between individual creepers and their entire nest is envisioned very differently by the author compared to by the film. Especially in the second book in the duology, Antimatter Blues, the author goes into a lot more depth exploring the creepers as a species, how they work, what they're capable of, and how they interact with human beings in much more complex ways. Let's talk about the main characters next, starting with the leading character, Mickey Barnes. The film did a pretty good job recreating the reality that Mickey will just constantly be surrounded by high risk of death. But I do think that how this affects Mickey in terms of his personality and behavior is a little bit different in the film versus the book. Mickey in the book is kind of used to being somewhat ignored and sidelined by everyone else on the ship. The book specifies that Mickey is a historian, so he doesn't really have any medical or scientific or military training that would qualify him for any of the core tasks of this spacefaring expedition. So basically, his only role on the ship is to be sent on missions where there's a likelihood of death, so that he would die and be reprinted rather than an irreplaceable member of the ship. So this is a very bleak reality that he lives in, and everyone around him pretty much treats him as a disposable rather than as an equal. My impression of Book Mickey is he has pretty much accepted that he's not going to be seen as the cool guy. He will have very few friends, and he kind of faces the world with this funny nihilism, almost like using humor as a defense mechanism type of personality. When it comes to his copy, Mickey 8, the book doesn't really give him a whole lot of narrative weight. Since the story is told from a first-person perspective in the voice of Mickey 7, Mickey 8 is just the copy that he's constantly trying to avoid being seen at the same time in the same place. So there isn't a whole lot of dedicated character development on the part of Mickey 8. In the film, however, I think Robert Pattinson did a great job of performing Mickey 17 in contrast with Mickey 18. I saw his performance of Mickey 17 as quite timid, maybe a little bit shy, sometimes sad, and trying to not draw too much attention to himself, whereas Mickey 18 is a little bit more aggressive and angry. Now, this aggression is not really seen in the book, but I do think that that personality trait was crucial for how the story unfolded and the actions that Mickey 18 took later in the film. Now, the character that I think was a most accurate reproduction in terms of personality is Nasha. Nasha is Mickey's long-term partner. This is revealed very early on in the book and very early on in the film. Nasha is very devoted to Mickey, and she can sometimes be a little bit possessive. Nasha is a flitter pilot in the book. She is very confident, very self-assured, and she will always take decisive action wherever she sees fit. I think Naomi Ackie did a great job playing this character, who is pretty much a thunderstorm in the shape of a woman. You should never be surprised if Nasha pulls out a gun or starts throwing punches, because if Nasha sees a problem as being solved with bullets or fists, then that's exactly what she will do. And I do think the film gave her a more significant narrative role in forwarding the plot. Next, we have to talk about the character Marshall. Now, in the book, there is Commander Hieronius Marshall, whereas in the film, the commander is called Kenneth Marshall. Now, the name change isn't just because Kenneth is a lot simpler, but because he is a completely different person as he is in the book. Commander Marshall in the book has one singular focus, and that is to keep the ship in line. He is very much a military type of leader. He runs a tight ship, pun intended. He is quite often angry, and whenever Mickey and his very few friends step out of line, he would punish them by docking their calorie rations. At least throughout the duration of the first book, Mickey 7, I would say Hieronius Marshall is very much a stick up the rear end drill sergeant. Whereas Kenneth Marshall is a politician that a lot of people see as a too obvious parody of Trump. He is very arrogant and he kind of uses his position to create this cult of personality rather than effecting leadership. He is very much only concerned with his image and he's constantly surrounded by sycophants, whereas none of that happens in the book. His wife Ylfa, who is somewhat of a puppet master of Kenneth Marshall, is not a character that exists in the book. Next is the character Timo, played by Stephen Yeun, who is kind of this smarmy, opportunist friend of Mickey 17 in the film. I think maybe Timo is a stand-in for the character Berto Gomez in the book. However, Timo and Berto are completely different people as well. Just like Timo was Mickey 17's friend before the ship took off, Berto was Mickey 7's friend before they both signed on for the expedition. However, Berto in the book, I think, is best compared to the quarterback in a high school. He is explicitly described as a physical savant in Antimatter Blues. He is that character who is very physically able, and he's pretty much just automatically good at anything that he tries to do. There is a sports called Pogball in this universe, and Berto pretty much started advancing towards professional level as soon as he tried the sport out of curiosity. And as a flitter pilot, he can do these impossible stunts and maneuvers that no one else think would be possible. As different as Timo is from Berto, I do think that he is a very, very good character for the film. Of course, Stephen Yeun's performance added so much to this character, both in terms of his comic relief and his ability to add narrative tension in certain situations, regardless of him being scammy and untrustworthy. Lastly, the character Kai, which I can only guess is probably a stand-in for Kat Chen in Mickey 7 and Antimatter Blues. But like with Timo vs. Berto, Kai and Kat Chen are completely different people. Although her personality is a little bit less dramatically distinct, like Nasha or Hieronymus Marshall in the book, I do think that as a character she has a pretty clear purpose, which is to do her job as a security officer and do it well. I think the biggest difference between the book and the film is in Kat Chen's relationship to Mickey. Now, the book makes it very, very clear that their friendship is platonic. Although they're very amiable towards each other, they would talk and banter and joke and go on missions together. There's no romantic tension whatsoever between them. I would say that in the book, a decision that Kat Chen made definitely helped propel the story towards its dramatic conclusion, whereas in the film, I don't think Kai served a whole lot of narrative purpose other than to kind of be a romantic rival. Yeah, I didn't really think that that was necessary, and certainly the book did not go in that direction. Now, if you haven't seen the film, I would say this is probably the point where you would want to skip ahead or simply skip out of the video, because the next segment will have more spoilers about the specific plot points in the film. But overall, I can tell you that most of the major events, the major action-packed scenes in the film are simply not in the book. I would say that overall these are two different stories that share some of the premise. So hopefully that would help you make a decision on whether to watch the film and read the book, or choose one, or do both. Let's start with the dinner scene where Mickey 17 and Kai were invited to have a special dinner with Kenneth Marshall and his wife Ylfa. Now, this was simply not in the book because Marshall was a completely different leader in the book. He's not concerned with putting on a show or doing any of that. And of the major action sequences in the film, I think this one was probably my least favorite because I simply was not sure what kind of narrative function it served other than a farce. I guess it is highlighting some kind of class divide between the leadership of the ship and its crew members, where Kenneth Marshall and his wife have access to all of this luxurious food. The common crew members are limited to calorie rations and disgusting paste. Now, this type of a scene, I do think, is very much in line with the style of Bong Joon-ho. I think, as we've seen in Snowpiercer and Parasite, critique upon wealth disparity, classism, inequality is very much one of his favorite themes. But there is no indication in the book that Marshall or any of the higher ranking leaders and officials on the ship have access to better food than the rest of the crew members. And that discussion that Kenneth Marshall had with Kai regarding reproducing and populating the colony was just very uncomfortable. And the book did have a plan for that. So the ship was carrying embryos, and one of the plans for the colony to survive was just to start bringing the embryos out of stasis and have them grow into children and adults and so on and so forth. So that problem is taken care of. And I don't think the author was ever concerned with female members on the space expedition being pressured into reproducing against their will. Another example of a major narrative deviation is the debt with Darius Blank seems to just continue to haunt Mickey and Timo in the film. However, in the book, Darius Blank was a debtor of Mickey 7, but he was pretty much just left behind when Mickey went on the ship. So all of that chainsaw massacre and Timo somehow continuing wanting to be in Darius Blank's good graces, those were just the film's invention. They're not in the book. Also not in the book was the scene where Kenneth Marshall was doing some kind of a TV special, and he's cutting some type of obsidian rock, and then the creepers started falling out of them. I think all of that is a result of who Kenneth Marshall is in the film, which is a completely different person as Hieronymus Marshall in the book. And the entire narrative climax of that very explosive confrontation between the humans and the creepers at the end is pretty much entirely Bong Joon-ho's invention. Although I really did enjoy watching that scene, especially Nasha taking very decisive action to save that baby, I think book Nasha would have done the same, although that scene was just not in the book. But it's very much in line with her personality of immediately doing whatever she thinks is necessary. And Robert Pattinson demonstrated really, really well in that final scene the essential contrast between Mickey 17 and Mickey 18, and he did all this very emotionally charged acting, all in an American accent, which is foreign to him. So much applause for that. And Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette also gave some of their best performances in the entire film in that scene. So even though it was a complete narrative deviation from the book, I very much enjoyed watching that action sequence, and I very much had fun in the cinema. But did you notice in 3 of the 4 scenes that I just described, the character Kai is simply not present? It really seemed like she didn't do much that drove the plot forward. I think that character was just included to turn a love triangle into a love square. Whereas Kat Chan was very much involved in pushing Mickey 7 towards its conclusion, and she's one of the quite central players in Antimatter Blues. But despite all of these deviations from the book that it was based on, I do think that Mickey 17 was a very enjoyable film to watch, and I really appreciated how Bong Joon-ho handled the narrative versus the backstory, and how it was very linear and very easy to follow, and very much action-packed, tightly paced from beginning to end. And I think it's very valuable to have adaptation of new material in a sea of remakes and sequels and prequels that are based on IP that's decades old. Now, Mickey 7 was published in 2022 and Antimatter Blues was published in 2023. So these are brand new stories that we're starting to see on screen, and I'm very happy about that. And my personal conclusion from this comparison is that even if you've seen the film, I still very much do recommend that you read the full duology. Not only did the author build a more complex and more expansive world that's fun to imagine and fun to immerse in, there are also a lot more philosophical reflections and discussions that are worth your time considering in this duology. The author really likes the ship of Theseus analogy, where if an explorer sets out in a ship and certain parts start breaking down, so he ends up replacing them on his expedition and then come home with every single part on the ship replaced, is it still the same ship? And he uses this as a reflection on Mickey's situation, where if you upload your memory into a completely different body, are you still the same human, and are you still human? And I do think another philosophical concern in the story of Mickey 7 and Antimatter Blues is the relationship between the individual and the community. You see this explored in what Mickey is willing to do for the other crew members of the ship, the types of highly fatal missions that he's willing to take on, and how the community views that in return. And you also see that explored in how the creeper's nest is structured, which is explored a lot further in depth in Antimatter Blues. So as much as the film is thought-provoking in its own way, I do think that there's still more to think about and reflect upon after you read the source material. I think Mickey 17 first and foremost is a Bong Joon-ho film before it is a sci-fi film. I think it's very much in line with the director's style of social commentary and critique wrapped up in absurd dark humor. Although the book gives you a good dose of dark humor as well, it is very much a pure science fiction, where it's very much focused on scientific and technological possibilities and the implications of those for human beings. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my comparison and analysis. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the film and the books. Please let me know in the comments below whether you've seen Mickey 17, whether you've read Mickey 7 Antimatter Blues, or whether you plan on reading them. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.